Program. My guest, Tom Hoverstad, who's a scientist at the Southern Research and Outreach Center at Waseca. Tom, welcome back to the program, and boy, do I have some topics to talk to you about when I think about this growing season so far.
Yeah, good morning, Jerry. It's always an unusual growing season, no matter what happens. And I've been in this business a long time, and every year we see something we've never seen before, so that's what keeps it interesting.
And it's job security for scientists and agronomists, I always say.
Yeah, and farmers are always learning, and they always want to learn too. And every year, they find out something they hadn't seen before. I realized that most deeply in the spring of 2013 when it was the delayed planting. Remember, we had so much rain in the spring, and everybody wanted to talked about prevented planting, and I had a lot of calls from farmers about, they had insurance coverage. If they didn't plant a crop, they'd get a certain amount of money. But none of them really wanted to do that. And I kind of figured it out that they don't learn anything by not putting a crop in. That's what they want to do. That's why they're in farming. They want to raise a crop because every year they learn something they didn't know the year before. And that it was hard for a lot of people to not plant anything that year.
And it's something about watching a nice crop growing in the field, driving by, walking through it, just driving by the road, and you see that beautiful corn crop or beans or sweet corn, peas, whatever it may be, and you can say, I did that.
Yeah, there's a lot of satisfaction in making that happen.
Well, Tom, we hadn't talked for a while about what a growing season this has been. I remember the big talk all winter long was how dry it was going to be, and we were going to have this big drought. And last time I checked, maybe we had some hot temperatures, but we sure didn't have a drought.
No, we sure have not had a drought. And yeah, you're right. Last winter it was talk about coming off an El Nino. They had this strong El Nino, and I guess all they've got to go by is past history. And I guess following an El Nino the next year is kind of correlated to warm and dry summers, but sure hasn't turned out that way.
I remember what Mark Seeley told me once is, until proven otherwise, stick with the pattern. The patterns have a tendency of wanting to repeat themselves.
Yep, and I guess this must not have fit the pattern. I don't know, but it's been so humid. That's the thing that I've noticed. I don't have real good records. I mean, we've got humidity that we record every day, but I'm going to have to talk to somebody like Mark Seeley's office about did we set any humidity records. It seems like every day it's just the dew point. I was out putting fungicide on corn one day, and we've got a little weather station out there, and the dew point that day was 82. It was crazy hot, and every day we get a break from it from a day or so, but then we're right back to those high dew points and high humidities.
And it seemed like the pattern the whole summer long was we'd have fairly warm temperatures for a few days. It would cool off, maybe normal, a touch below normal, and then it would get warm again.
Yep, we'd get sometimes like a half a day break from the heat, and it would start turning around and warm right up again.
Well, Tom, we have to take a break for the markets here in about 50 seconds. When we come back, we want to talk about the growing season. We must have come close to setting some precipitation records, at least in July or August, maybe some days with temperature. And so we want to talk about that. Also on my list is tip back. My corn was pollinating that third week of July, the week of the Rice County Fair. And it was so hot and humid, and I've got a fair amount of tip back. Quickly, Tom, have you heard a bit about that too? Some guys talking about it?
I've heard a little bit about it. I think people make a little more of it than what it is. I think when we harvest our corn, we're going to find that there's a pretty decent crop out there. The tip back, I always say you want to see a little bit of tip back. If you don't see any, you didn't plant enough plants.
Well, so, Tom, stand by. We have to check out the markets, and then we'll continue with today's AM Minnesota.
Are mixed. Soybeans and corn are lower. I'm John Perkins with a Brownfield Market Update.
Tom Hoverstad is a scientist at the Southern Research and Outreach Center at Waseca. Tom was my guest on today's AM Minnesota program. Tom, just before the break, you said don't worry too much about a little tip back. Now, I know that if you don't have any tip back, I've always been told that, well, you didn't plant your population heavy enough. But I saw, 1.5 inch. My one field even had about 2 inches of tip back, and that was a little more than made me comfortable.
Yeah, that does sound like a lot. And I guess if we think about how corn figures all that out, the number of rows of kernels and the number of potential kernels is that is determined fairly early on, like at the 8-leaf stage. That little ear is developing way down in there at that time, and then when pollination does occur, that's when corn decides how many kernels it's going to go ahead and try to fertilize and make. So if things aren't right at pollination time, even though they maybe have been pretty good up to that, it won't pollinate it. The silks from the butt of the ear come out first, and if conditions aren't right, it doesn't put out as many silks, and the tip of the ear doesn't get pollinated then. So there's several things that can do that. Maybe certainly hot weather, dry weather. We weren't on the dry side, but maybe a little bit of heat. The other thing that can lead to problems there is pruning by like rootworm beetles and chewing the silks off. So all those things can lead to a problem, and if it is, we don't have great conditions right at that time, it can be a little bit of an issue.
Now, one agronomist told me, Jerry, don't worry about what you don't have. Pay attention to what you do. And they still have a nice size ear, 30, 35 long, 16 around. But last year I had an ear that was filled right out and bulging out the end.
Yeah, last year, and I've seen it this year. I've seen a few fields that have some of those kernels bulging out the end. So I think variability is going to be an issue this year. We're going to have some fields that do a little better than expected, and some fields that I think you might be disappointed with.
The other thing that I had going against me is about a week before my corn started pollinating. I got hit with some hail, and one cornfield that had the worst tip back had beans right next to it, and they came up with 35% hail damage at the beans. Well, corn got hit pretty hard then, and there's one more stress added to it.
That can throw it into a defensive mode, and even some of that spring frost where plants got set back a ways, that may be some part of it too. So
May 15th, I will always remember that date too now.
Yeah, we froze a lot of corn, but by and large, it all came back pretty good.
Up until a couple, 3 years ago, I never paid any attention to the nighttime temperatures, but apparently that can have a huge impact. And right when a lot of our corn was pollinating, I came to the studio in the morning, got here a little after 4 o'clock, and I'd see the temperature 82 degrees. I mean, that was a low temperature for the day, or the night, I mean.
Yeah, my feeling is corn does its best when we get some cooler nights where it gets a lot of work done during the day and it gets a little breather and some rest at night. When it stays that warm at night, it tends to want to keep working too hard, and I think that isn't the best situation for corn either.
Well, how are we doing in terms of rainfall?
Well, first let's talk about it's been a little on the warm side, but not outrageously warm. We're at 2,318 growing degree units as of now. That's about 10% ahead of normal. We usually hit that growing degree unit mark at about September 12th. Plus, we had an early planting season, so really as far as heat units go, we're in good shape. The big news is all the rain we've had, and that's been extremely variable too. We were tracking pretty good. We didn't have too much in May or June. I know some of western Minnesota had a lot more rain early in the spring. We had a nice planting season right here in South Central, and I think quite a bit of your area experienced pretty good planting conditions. Then July and August, we have really got the rain. We had our second wettest July on record, about 9 inches of rain. Normal for both July and August is around 4.5. So we had about double our July rain, second wettest July on record. Now this August, we are standing at 11.7 inches. And our record for August, set back in 1924, by the way, a long time ago, is 11.89. So it's quite likely we're going to finish second place in August, too. And 20 inches of rain in those 2 months. So it's really been a lot, and it's been quite variable. We've got our total stands at 11.7 for August. I would believe certain areas could add or subtract from that 3 to 4 inches. just by the nature of these storms, they've been kind of some smaller cells that we've had these real humid days, and all of a sudden a rainstorm will pop up in one area and just sit there for a couple, 3 hours and just dump a lot of rain.
Well, my farmers on the other end of Waseca County compared the experiment station to the south, and in August, up until last Wednesday, we'd only had 3.5 inches the entire month of August. Got 2 inches Wednesday, then they came to pick my sweet corn Thursday evening, and it was a little sloppy where they drove, but that was it. Didn't even cut in, and I was so thankful that all that heavy rain missed me when they came to take the sweet corn.
Yeah, that is an issue. I've seen a number of sweet corn fields. You know, sweet corn, when it's ready, they've got like 1 or 2 days to get it.
Or peas, even more so.
Peas do that also, and this year I've seen some sweet corn fields that are a real mess. Be nice if they could get those landowners there could level some of them and maybe put in some of these radishes to try and cover the ground for the fall here, and maybe get a little recovery on those fields. But there's some that are really torn up, but it's by necessity.
Well, I planted my sweet corn on like June 3rd, so it pollinated after that really hot week in July. Now, granted, sweet corn I only plant at 24,000. That's what they want you to plant it at. My corn I plant about 35, but filled right out to the end, and I had the best sweet corn crop I've ever grown.
Well, that's good. The sweet corn does look pretty good, and that usually bodes well for corn yields. What I hope is we can get some dry weather, because harvest season's coming up, and that's when we use some of our heaviest equipment we see on the fields all year. And soils have a lot more bearing strength when they're a little bit dry than when they're on the wet side. You know, a nice soil is about 30% water, 30% air, and 30% mineral. Well, you'd like to see, or 1/3 of each of those. And when you go across there with that heavy equipment, what you're going to push out is the air. If it's saturated with water, you can't remove that. It's just going to push on it. So the air goes out, and then you get compacted soils, and that I'd really like to see some dry weather and give our soils some bearing strength for our grain carts and combines that we pull across them in the fall.
Well, I'm hoping that the weather pattern finally switches from much, much wetter than normal to drier than normal, and we could do just fine without another rain shower till about end of November or December in my book.
That's my campaign slogan. I'm not running for anything, but I've got a slogan this fall: no rain till Thanksgiving.
We have to talk about one of the other issues, Tom, that driving around our listening area, giant ragweed sticking out above the corn. And in the bean field, some I see nice and clean, and some I see a lot of giant ragweed and water hemp.
Yep, there's definitely 2 things we need to do a better job on. And that's, first one, giant ragweed. It's almost rare now to see a cornfield without a giant ragweed or 2 sticking out. Giant ragweed, we used to always think of that as kind of an early emerging weed. We took care of a lot of it with tillage, and if you kept it out of the fence lines, you know, usually there'd be some that would creep into the field from the fence lines, and maybe they'd make an extra tillage pass there to kind of slow them down. But they have turned into a weed that has germinated a little later, and it's escaped some of our corn programs. That we've used quite a bit of residual herbicides in corn, last quite a bit into the season through our post-emergence applications, but some of those are coming up after that, and they're going ahead and bolting right out of the corn canopy right now. So that's something we need to do a better job on. It's going to be a real problem in soybeans. In corn, the answer is not too complicated. We've got a pretty good family of products that work on that. The growth regulators, the entire dicamba family of products, Status being one that really works pretty good. Callisto's not bad on it. We've got some decent answers in corn. Soybeans, it's a little bit different. It's a hard to control with soil-applied materials in soybeans because it's a large seed of broadleaf, and soybeans are a large seed of broadleaf, so it's hard to get soil-applied material that does a good job on giant ragweed. The one I've had the best luck with is first rate. And we don't have that family of growth regulator herbicides in soybeans yet. That's coming soon in both the Enlist and the Extend programs. So I think that's going to bring us another mode of action that maybe will help us with giant ragweed in soybeans. I think that's an area where we are in need of a better answer.
The PPOs work very good, at least they have for me, if the ragweed isn't, growing really tall.
That's the issue. The PPO herbicides, that would be things like Flexstar, Blazer, Cobra. They have pretty good activity, but they need to be on when the weeds are 4 inches tall or so. And there's a lot of them that we're not getting when they're quite that small, and there's a lot of them that if you do make that application early, there's a few ragweed that are coming up later. So we do have some good answers, but it takes a little more management, it takes a little more diligence and better timing.
Speaking of timing, I had some weeds along a waterway and fence line that were about 8 foot tall, and I killed them with plain old glyphosate.
Yep, some of those weeds you can if you took a hand sprayer or something, coated them good with Roundup, we can kill some of them, but that doesn't really come into play in our in-crop use because
well, that was my point. I had a 15-gallon sprayer in the back of the Gator. In the 15 gallons, I think I had half a gallon of glyphosate in it, and the spray was dripping off the leaves.
Yep, and that does help keep them out, prevent them from making some seed and becoming a problem that creeps in from your waterway. So that's something that can help you out for the next few years down the road. The good news on giant ragweed is this. If we can clean it up for 3 years, it doesn't have a real long seed bank in the soil. So try to think about that. Try to be diligent in both corn and soybeans for 3 years, and I think we can make some real progress on this giant ragweed problem.
Well, let's change to the other one, Tom, and this is something that happened to me this summer and scared the heck out of me. I've used a lot of Liberty and atrazine on my corn, and then the glyphosate and like the PPOs on my beans, so I was changing things up. I planted beans after peas on July 15th. Now, I'll let you know in about another month and a half if it's a cover crop or if it's a bean crop. I'll let you know. But anyway, it got a rain right after I planted them. The beans were up 3 or 4 inches. I saw them on a Sunday. I went out 5 days later, and I just could not believe, loaded with water hemp. And I go, where the heck did all of that come from? I went out with 1.5 quarts of Durango and the additives. Killed the vast majority of them, but there's some here and there. Had a little bit of discoloring on the leaves, and that was it. They were growing yet. Yeah,
that's the issue with water hemp. You pretty well described the entire scenario. Water hemp has the ability to emerge late in the year, especially when moisture conditions are good, like we've had. This has been the year when that topsoil has been constantly wet, so it's a good environment to germinate those seeds, and we can certainly see water hemp germinating up through the middle of August and going ahead and making some seeds. So that's part of the problem. We've really based our weed control on glyphosate and has no soil activity, so things that can germinate late in the year, like water hemp, can get away from glyphosate. The other thing about water hemp is it's got male and female plants, so it's always cross-pollinated. That means a real genetic diversity out there. And there's a few that Roundup isn't effective on, or glyphosate. So when one of those survives, not only does it make seed, but one of those male plants survives, it's got pollen everywhere. So we are seeing a lot of water hemp that Roundup is no longer effective on. And as a matter of fact, if I would say when you're planning a weed control program for water hemp, I would treat it as though glyphosate or Roundup will not be effective. The good news is it's very responsive to soil-applied herbicides. It's a small-seeded broadleaf. That's what those products do well. Things like Dual, that family of chemistry works pretty good on it. So it does respond well to soil-applied herbicides as long as you can back that up with something. And this year we've got a nice canopy of soybeans out there, and that's helpful. previous to this, we've had a couple of years when soybean canopy was a little weak. We didn't have a great crop. If you get some daylight in between those rows, that's when water hemp will sneak in there. So I think another program that we've got that we should consider, I said I'd act as though glyphosate doesn't work on it, but I think the Liberty program in soybeans may be a good avenue for controlling water hemp. I would investigate that, and then we've also got that new technology with growth regulators in soybeans. So problem in corn is I think a lot of our water hemp came up in there and you don't even see it because it grows pretty short in corn, and by the time we harvest corn, it's probably frozen and gone. You didn't even know it was there, but it made a lot of seed. It does also well in some of these drowned out areas. It likes a lot of water, so it's having a good year this year, especially on some of those areas. If we had water standing and the crop didn't do well, water hemp can really invade there, and that's part of the problem.
Now, what I did after on my pea beans, then it was about 10 days, 2 weeks after I hit it with the generic glyphosate, and it was obvious. I probably got, like I said, 95% of them, but I was worried about how many seeds those others could produce, so I went out with Ultra Blazer. I didn't really want to burn my beans and set them back, but I can't let those go to seed because obviously they're resistant to glyphosate. Now, I haven't seen the field for 3 or 4 days, but 3 days after I planted them, those ragweeds or those water hemps were all brown, so I'm hoping they're dead and gone.
Yeah, that PPO family of chemistry works pretty good on the water hemps also. The issue is by the time you've already put glyphosate on and said, oh, it didn't work, it's usually about 6 or 8 inches tall, and it's difficult to control them with conventional herbicides. You want to think about doing your Flexstar or Blazer the first time and get those when they're about 2 to 4 inches tall, and you can do a real good job on controlling them. The other thing I've had some luck with is the good old-fashioned cultivator. Not a lot of people even have one anymore, but that can help out in those cases.
Here's what I noticed, Tom. I had a field, and there were a few escapes. Water hemps were sticking their heads through. It was the spots that had drowned it out in 13 and 14 or along the headlands. So I'm thinking, there aren't that many. I'm going to go out there and pull them. The thing I noticed is the vast majority of those water hemps were growing dead center between the 30-inch rows of beans.
Yep, they get a little daylight in there. And
I went out with my Flexstar GT about the 20th of July, or of June, and so the beans weren't canopied yet, so I'm guessing that they had the opportunity, but that's where the majority of them were going. And Lisa Benkin has always mentioned that, and I couldn't say the word of getting that thing out of the shed again, but boy, then I kept thinking, all right, I pulled that one out, that's a couple 100,000 seeds that won't be in this field next year, and then I go pull another one, and I'm thinking, gee, if there were too many of these, maybe sitting on a whatever you called it would be easier than pulling them.
Yep, not a lot of people have them anymore, but we do keep advancing technology, and I think we'll have some pretty good answers. Just takes a little bit of watching what's out there and making a program around the issues you're seeing.
I have heard some scuttlebutt that there's some water hemp in the Midwest or maybe even in Minnesota that is now resistant to the PPO family.
I believe that is true. I've not seen any, but that is one issue that anytime we use something repeatedly on the same species of weed, we're going to select for some that are somehow tolerant to that, whether they have some sort of a characteristic to them, waxier coated leaves, or some trait that allows them to tolerate some of those programs, and we usually select for them, and then we get in trouble. So it's a good idea to always keep your eyes on the mode of action or the site of action of a number of products, and try and mix them up a little bit, and I think you can make those programs last a lot longer.
Tom, we only have about 2.5 minutes left, but what would your recommendation be then for guys that have some water hemp or giant ragweed that are out of control? My first thought is, if we get these new technologies, the Extend, the Enlist, maybe a little bit farther down the road, save that technology for beans because it's easier to control the water hemp and giant ragweed in corn?
Yes, especially giant ragweed and corn is not too difficult. We've got a number of good products, and most of the giant ragweed, glyphosate still works pretty well on it. You want to talk about something that probably provides a little bit of soil residual in that growth regulator family, something like a Status, I think will really help out. A number of the soil applied products that we use in corn do offer quite a bit of giant ragweed control, and that can be very helpful. And a number of them have Callisto soil applied. That works pretty good on it. So we've got some good answers. Verdict Sure Start has a growth regulator component in it. They do a pretty good job. So corn is really the way to go if you can do a diligent job in corn, you're going to have a lot much easier time in soybeans with giant ragweed. The new systems out there, I wouldn't jump in both feet first. Let's kind of start slow with some of that technology and see how it works for you. There's going to bring out a whole new set of issues with off-target movement and tank contamination that a lot of our people haven't really gone through.
The Roundup-ready babies.
That's right. If they've really concentrated their weed control efforts on Roundup, they're not used to some of those things that we used to have to deal with. So there'll be a little bit of a learning experience in that, but I think they can be useful.
Well, Tom, we have the news coming up, but I'm sure more information. It's going to be the hot topic at the winter meeting season, so we'll hear a lot more about it and how to deal with it this winter, I expect.
Yeah, some of those technologies are still coming through regulation. I'm not sure where they are, but I would expect that by the spring of 17, some of those may be ready to go, and we'll find out probably during this winter.
Thanks, Tom. Always enjoy visiting with you.
Thank you.